A nonprofit tied to Mayor Brandon Scott's wife stopped operations after receiving roughly $100,000 taxpayer dollars.
Patrick Huff from our Spotlight on Maryland team investigates the unanswered questions about whether those taxpayer funds will be returned.
Spoiler alert, Baltimore taxpayers, you are not receiving a dime of that money back because Brandon Scott obviously was funneling that to his then secret girlfriend, then baby mama, now wife. And guess what? You're just going to have to deal with this because this is standard fare for the Democratic Party to run these nonprofit connected corruption schemes. Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sean, and today we're going to talk about the recent scandal that Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott has fallen under, how, of course, the propaganda around him will help him obfuscate the consequences of this scandal. Perfect example of propaganda around Brandon Scott is that Channel 5 documentary, which I can't put in enough air quotes, where they make the case that Brandon Scott's social programs are what's behind the homicide drop in the city of Baltimore. Even though homicide did not drop when Brandon Scott ended up taking office, it actually dropped when they changed the district attorney from Marilyn Mosby to Ivan Bates 2 years later, and Ivan Bates started prosecuting repeat gun offenders. But because of all that positive PR, a lot of people are going to overlook this, even though this is clearly and obviously an issue of standard corruption that we see from Democratic Party officials. And by the way, the classic kind where you end up funneling money to the spouse or romantic partner, in this case both of Brandon Scott, because she was a secret girlfriend, now wife, and it's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. But before we get into any of that, I want to thank everybody for funneling money over to me over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
The fabulous, phenomenal, brilliant, and beautiful women of Be More Empowered who are empowering. Yeah, let's clap. There we go.
That was Mayor Brandon Scott at a July 2023 press conference where he praised leaders of a nonprofit awarded $80,000 as a part of a taxpayer-funded program. What he didn't mention was that one of those leaders he praised was his then girlfriend and now wife.
So look, it obviously should have been a red flag that you had Brandon Scott praising the beauty of the leadership of this nonprofit organization, this random nonprofit organization that was not on the radar for the city of Baltimore prior to Brandon Scott taking office. But suddenly, due to his criminal justice reforms, which by the way, by the numbers, absolutely did not work, saw an influx in cash. But of course, that influx in cash is actually explainable now that we know the history and the timeline by the fact that Brandon Scott started dating somebody who is in a position of power on said nonprofit. So again, you guys get how this works. You're figuring out what's going down. Brandon Scott takes office, progressive reformer, gonna shift money away from bad things like policing and whatnot into these social programs. He starts dating a woman who runs one of these nonprofits or is in the leadership of them. And suddenly this nonprofit that, by the way, doesn't even do its tax filings starts getting your taxpayer money from multiple different sources.
Mrs. Scott started working as the director of operations for Be More Empowered in September 2021. She started dating the mayor in 2022. Her employer began to receive money through the Baltimore city government in 2023, totaling $34,950 taxpayer dollars by 2024.
Now look, I just want to point out something obvious for you guys out there in the audience, but if you ever needed a giant red flag for an organization that is set up to scam the woke idiots out there in the world, this is that perfect example. Because if you look at the logo, first of all, you have the misspelling. It's not B-E, more empowered. It's B, the letter, more empowered. But in addition to that, you have black hair featured and a hijab, as if to signal all the woke idiots, all the left-wing white progressives, that this is the organization to donate to because they respect black women hair, and even black women's that don't even have to show their hair or aren't allowed to show their hair because they are religiously Islamic. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that not something that is obvious and suspicious? Isn't this not the biggest red flag that you could possibly have? No, you're gonna let this go? How about the fact that they don't even file their tax filings? Again, absurd, ridiculous how many times this happens and how many times it is often a connection between a romantic partner of the person who is in power and of the person who's getting the money. Remember when Cori Bush was doing something like this where she hired her boyfriend, who she didn't disclose was her boyfriend, to run security for her, go on all these lavish trips as security for her, while at the same time employing a real separate security firm to do her actual actual security, only to reveal later that she was in fact dating that individual. Well, it's something like this, but on a Baltimore scale. And yeah, it's absurd, but what are you gonna do besides point it out? And hopefully the voters will change their mind, which is not gonna happen because again, there's so much propaganda around Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott.
And that's not all. The Downtown Partnership of Baltimore awarded Be More Empowered $80,000 through a taxpayer-funded program in July 2023, a day before the Scotts went public with their relationship through a pregnancy announcement.
I mean, come on, guys. What are we even talking about here? How is this not obvious to everybody out there in the audience? One day before they announced that this lady was knocked up, and again, she works at this organization, they get their largest individual donation from the Baltimore City Council to the tune of $80,000. Now, of course, the payments were flowing all throughout this time. It took people a while to put the pieces together, but it's absolutely ridiculous and absurd that this can go on without being disclosed, that you could have a romantic interest in an organization that you're funneling taxpayer money to. You're actually having a child with that person who's in leadership at said organization, and we're all supposed to pretend like this is no big deal because, oh, Brandon Scott, he's having a baby, isn't that sweet? And also, none of these programs are actually reducing crime. Ivan Bates is, but we're gonna pretend like these reforms are reducing crime, and we'll go get the propagandists over at Channel 4, Channel 5, whatever the hell that stupid ass channel is called, in order to defend and basically run cover and make a propaganda narrative, a campaign video on behalf of Brandon Scott.
The taxpayer-backed Baltimore Children and Youth Fund sent Be More Empowered $62,500 from July 2023 to June 2024. Meanwhile, Be More Empowered has not filed a tax form since 2023, meaning it's almost a year behind its required filings with the IRS. And none of its previous tax forms mention Mrs. Scott's position or salary. Plus, Be More Empowered is listed on the Maryland government's charity database as delinquent.
I mean, come on, guys, come on. This woman works at this organization. She is secretly dating Brandon Scott. She ends up getting knocked up by Brandon Scott, and it turns out on none of the filings, her salary is listed at that organization. And by the way, they're not up to date on their filings, and yet they're still receiving money, even though they are listed by the state of Maryland as delinquent. Thus, you should not be funneling money over to them because they're not doing the required disclosures of how they're spending all this funds. And again, they have over $1 million. It is not crazy to say that Brandon Scott was also suggesting that private donors funnel money into this particular organization. And there's not really any explanation of what this group actually does because, spoiler alert, you never actually have to explain what a nonprofit is doing in the United States of America, as they happen to be just money sinks and sometimes taxpayer money sinks for the well-connected. And this is a perfect distillation of that concept.
So this one is a bit of a head scratcher.
Now look, I understand why the local news media seeks out an expert on nonprofits in order to get their take on this particular situation. But of course, this expert ends up saying, look, this is kind of baffling. I mean, they took all this taxpayer money at an organization that they never disclosed had a personal relationship to the mayor, and then they just shut down operations. And by the way, they were delinquent when they received some of this money. And I just think this defies logic. And again, if you're thinking about this in a logical way where we have sensible systems in order to check for fraud and whatnot, that would make perfect sense. But there's a reason why they don't list the girlfriend of Brandon Scott on the taxpayer filings that are required. It's because they don't want you to know what's actually going on. There's a reason why they don't list where the money is going and they don't do the filings. And now that Brandon Scott is the mayor of Baltimore, because this is a money sink. This is what we would call in old English, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this word, a scam, a fraud, a scam. Again, I'm saying allegedly because we don't know at this moment in time, but they're definitely in violation of what a nonprofit is supposed to do. And it's definitely incredibly sketchy that Brandon Scott had this relationship with this woman who is now his wife, and it was not revealed, and they were not receiving taxpayer money prior to his personal relationship, but then all of a sudden money gets shoveled in their direction and they shut down before they could even spend it. So where is that money? Where is that $1 million? Where is that over $100,000 in recently given taxpayer money?
Be More Empowered did not respond to questions about whether they will return taxpayer money. Mrs. Scott lists on her LinkedIn that she stopped working at Be More Empowered in September, which was the same month the nonprofit announced an organizational pause and was sued for not paying rent. Attempts to reach Mrs. Scott for comment were unsuccessful. The mayor's office did not respond to the following questions. How did Be More Empowered spend its taxpayer money? Will you request that Be More Empowered returns the funds? Was it a conflict of interest for Baltimore City to send Be More Empowered money as the organization was employing Mayor Scott's partner?
So yeah, unsurprisingly, everybody involved is ghosting this situation. Brendan Scott doesn't want to answer any questions. And again, you have the experts saying, yeah, it's kind of a conflict of interest. And it's really shady that they didn't disclose this, even though, again, the whole point of being able to run this kind of scheme is that you're not disclosing it. You're hiding information. Again, you have them not be married for a significant period of time, get all this money, and then she jumps off the sinking ship right before the organization is about to shutter in order to distance herself from that and hopefully distance her husband from that.
Be More Empowered received $25,000 from the Baltimore City government in 2023 stemming from the Federal American Rescue Plan Act. In 2024, Be More Empowered received $9,950 listed for the Youth Works program, which runs under the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. The $80,000 Be More Empowered received from the Downtown Partnership came through the Boost program, which is funded through a combination of private and public money. Mayor Scott sent $1.6 million in ARPA money to downtown partnerships in 2022 to help back the Boost program Be More Empowered benefited from 1 year later. A spokesman for Downtown Partnership told Spotlight on Maryland that Be More Empowered spent the $80,000 in accordance with its contract, which he said he could not provide.
So we get a little bit of the information related to the history of this organization, how some of the money was actually directed from Mayor Brandon Scott's office himself, again, to the organization that his wife worked at, who was then his girlfriend, which they had not disclosed to the public. And then, of course, we end up with the brick wall of the lack of transparency, which, of course, is them saying, oh, don't worry about it. They fulfilled their contract with that $80,000. However, we're not going to provide you the contract. You don't get to see it. You just have to trust us on this. Believe me, we are being 100% straight up and honest with you. I mean, the organization that we're talking about is not doing its, legally required filings, and we never disclosed that Brendan Scott's then girlfriend, now wife, worked there, so that the public could know when this money was going over there. But now, at this moment in time, we're being so straight up with you. Also, you can't see the contract. You can't look at it. You can't examine it. What do you think this is? Public money from the taxpayer contracted out with a nonprofit that has disclosure agreements? No. Shut up. You don't get to look at it, and probably you're an evil white racist.
Downtown Partnership's president, Shalonda Stokes, has a salary of $317,000. Stokes' Instagram shows several photos and videos of her with Mrs. Scott, including attending a Beyonce concert together last summer in a group that also included the wife of Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
I mean, guys, come on. What do you think is actually happening here? Are you guys paying attention to what's going on? Coincidentally, the woman that is in charge of one of the related organizations is pulling in a salary, again, doing nonprofit work, doing God's work, empowering the black women's, again, the black women that are working there, not the people that they're trying to serve. She gets paid over $300,000, and she has been seen going on lavish trips on her Instagram with, of course, Brendan Scott's then girlfriend, now wife, and the wife of Governor Wes Moore. Do you guys understand the corruption and how built into the system it actually is? They're benefiting directly from the funneling of taxpayer money to supposedly help the poor blacks, but in reality, the only people that they're helping are the corrupt people who happen to be black because it's Baltimore related in the nonprofit sector. Essentially, this is Black Lives Matter all over again. We're going to find out that they're buying mansions, and the reason they're doing so is in order to secure their own safety because, oh my God, it's so dangerous being a black woman's out in the world, especially when you have the protection of the Baltimore police or the state troopers like Governor Wes Moore's wife does or Brendan Scott's wife now does. But you know what? I want to leave this up to you guys out there in the audience. Do you think that there's nothing wrong at all whatsoever? It's all good in the hood, nothing for you guys to be concerned about? Or do you think that maybe there is something for us to see? And the fact that this organization shut down completely after receiving taxpayer funds is probably kind of criminal. I don't know, or at least questionable. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Now, as per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the madness and corruption down in Baltimore. Till next time.